The Galactic Academy of Advanced Survival Studies had never seen anything quite like the human application forms. Professor Zix Thara, a distinguished Valkyrian with 3 doctorate degrees in extreme environment adaptation, stared at her holographic display with all 4 of her eyes wide in disbelief. "These creatures want to enroll in our most dangerous course," she muttered to her assistant, Jorp, whose tentacles were currently busy organizing student files. "They claim their homeworld has prepared them adequately." Yorp's skin shifted to a pale blue, indicating confusion. "What classification is their planet, Professor?" "That's the problem," Zix Thara replied, her mandibles clicking nervously. "According to the Galactic Safety Council, Earth is classified as a Class 13 death world, the highest danger rating possible. The application had arrived 3 months ago, submitted by something called the United Earth Colonial Initiative. The humans requested enrollment for 12 of their species in the Academy's most elite program. Extreme Survival 101. This course was designed for the galaxy's toughest species, those who had evolved on worlds with at least moderate environmental challenges. Most students came from Class 3 or IV worlds, planets with slightly higher gravity than standard, or perhaps 2 suns instead of 1. The bravest applicants usually hailed from Class 6 worlds where the atmospheric pressure might be double the galactic norm, or where the temperature occasionally dropped below freezing. But Class 13? No one had ever applied from a Class 13 world before. Most scientists believed nothing intelligent could evolve on such a planet and survive long enough to develop space travel. "Have you reviewed their planetary assessment?" Yorp asked, his tentacles pausing their work. Zix Thara pulled up Earth's file and immediately wished she hadn't. The data made her feel faint. Earth's gravity was 1.3 times galactic standard. Its atmospheric pressure varied wildly depending on altitude and weather patterns. The planet experienced regular seismic activity, volcanic eruptions, and massive storms that could level entire cities. But that wasn't the worst part. Earth's weather systems included something called lightning, electrical discharges from the sky that could kill instantly. The planet regularly experienced temperature variations from below freezing to hot enough to kill most known species. And somehow, impossibly, the humans had evolved in an environment where deadly microorganisms, venomous creatures, and predators competed for resources in a constant biological arms race. "Look at this," Zix Thara said, pointing to a particularly disturbing section. "Their planet is 70% covered in a liquid that would drown most air-breathing species. And they've learned to swim in it. For recreation." Yorp's skin turned a sickly green. "Perhaps we should recommend they apply for a beginner course instead." "I tried that," the professor replied. "Their diplomatic representative said they'd already completed similar training on their homeworld and were looking for a fun challenge." The Academy had strict policies about discrimination based on species or homeworld origin. Every sapient being had the right to education, regardless of their background. But Zix Thara had genuine concerns about the safety of other students. What if these humans accidentally hurt someone? What if their death world conditioning made them too aggressive for classroom environments? She decided to review the course curriculum one more time. Extreme Survival 101 was a 12-week program that took students through progressively challenging environments. Week 1 started on Kepler Station, a comfortable space facility with standard gravity and atmosphere. From there, students would face simulated survival scenarios on various hostile worlds. The final exam took place on Rigel 7th, a Class 8 world known for its crushing gravity, toxic atmosphere, and carnivorous plant life. In the Academy's 200-year history, only 63% of students had passed this final test. Those who failed were rescued by emergency teams, but usually required significant medical treatment and psychological counseling. Send them an acceptance letter, Zix Thara finally decided, but include extra liability waivers, and contact the medical bay, tell them to prepare for possible injuries. 2 weeks later, the humans arrived. Zix Thara watched from her office window as their transport ship landed in the Academy's docking bay. She expected to see large, heavily armored beings emerging, creatures that looked like they'd been forged in the fires of a hostile world. Instead, 12 relatively small bipeds walked down the ramp, looking around with what appeared to be curiosity and excitement. They wore simple clothing and carried basic luggage. The only thing that seemed unusual about them was their constant chatter and the way they kept pointing at things. Apparently fascinated by the Academy's architecture, They look so ordinary, Yorp observed, joining her at the window. Appearances can be deceiving, Zixthera replied, though privately she was thinking the same thing. The lead human, who had introduced himself in communications as Commander Sarah Chen, approached the reception desk with a warm smile. She thanked the staff for accommodating their group and asked if there was anything special they needed to know about Academy protocols. Within an hour, word had spread throughout the facility about the Deathworld students. Faculty members found excuses to walk past the orientation room, hoping to catch a glimpse of these legendary survivors. Some whispered that the humans might revolutionize survival training. Others quietly worried that the Academy's carefully designed challenges might be completely inadequate. Dr. Manthor, the Academy's physician, had spent the previous week researching human biology and was thoroughly confused by his findings. According to his analysis, humans should not be able to survive in most environments that other species considered mildly challenging. Their temperature tolerance was narrow, their atmospheric requirements specific, and their physical strength seemed average at best. Yet somehow, these beings had not only survived on a class Thymene death world, but had thrived well enough to develop advanced technology and space travel. It defied everything the medical community understood about evolutionary adaptation. As evening approached, Zixthara decided to introduce herself personally to the human students. She found them in the Academy's cafeteria, sampling various galactic cuisines with obvious enthusiasm. They were laughing and sharing stories about their journey, seeming completely relaxed despite being on an alien space station surrounded by creatures they'd never seen before. Commander Chen? Zixthara approached their table carefully. I'm Professor Zixthara, your primary instructor for Extreme Survival 101. Sarah Chen stood and extended her hand in what Zixthara had learned was a human greeting gesture. Professor, thank you so much for accepting our application. We're really excited to get started. I must ask, Zixthara said, are you certain your team is prepared for this course? It's quite challenging, even for species from hostile environments. Sarah's smile widened. Oh, we're ready. Actually, we're hoping to learn some new techniques. Earth keeps us pretty busy with survival scenarios, but we figure there's always room for improvement. Looking at the humans' confident, friendly faces, Zixthara felt a mixture of admiration and deep concern. Tomorrow would be their first day of training, and she suspected it would be unlike anything the Academy had ever experienced. The first day of Extreme Survival 101 began at dawn, Galactic Standard Time. Professor Zixthara stood in the Academy's main training facility, watching as students from 12 different species filed into the room. The humans entered last, still chatting among themselves and looking around with obvious interest at the advanced equipment. Welcome to Extreme Survival 101, Zixthara announced, her voice carrying clearly through the room's translation system. This course will test your limits and teach you to survive in environments that would kill most galactic citizens within minutes. She gestured to a holographic display showing various hostile worlds. Today we begin with basic atmospheric adaptation. Each of you will enter a simulation chamber that replicates the atmosphere of Thanix Prime, a Class Phi world with low oxygen and high methane content. The other students shifted nervously. Thanix Prime was known throughout the galaxy as one of the more challenging training worlds. The Gordanian student, whose species came from a Class 4 world, had spent weeks preparing for this moment with special breathing exercises and dietary supplements. The exercise is simple. Zixthara continued. Remain conscious and functional in the Thanix atmosphere for 30 minutes. You may use any personal protection you've brought, but Academy safety equipment is forbidden during testing. One by one, students entered the individual simulation pods. The first was Kreltok, a reptilian saurian whose homeworld had slightly thicker atmosphere than galactic standard. Within 12 minutes, his breathing became labored, and emergency sensors automatically removed him from the chamber. He would pass the test barely but clearly struggled. The Gordanian lasted 18 minutes before requesting extraction. The two Centaurian students, known for their physical endurance, managed 25 and 28 minutes respectively. Each emergence was accompanied by gasping, wheezing, and immediate requests for medical oxygen. Then came the humans' turn. Sarah Chen entered the first pod with the same calm confidence she'd shown since arriving. Zixthara monitored her vital signs carefully, expecting to see the familiar pattern of stress responses that indicated atmospheric distress. Instead, Sarah's readings remained surprisingly stable. Her heart rate increased slightly, but stayed well within normal ranges. Her breathing rhythm adjusted, but didn't show signs of oxygen starvation. After 15 minutes, she was actually humming to herself. "Is her monitor malfunctioning?" Yorp whispered, checking the readings twice. "I don't think so," Zixthara replied, equally puzzled. 20 minutes passed. 25. Sarah's vitals actually seemed to be improving as her body adapted to the atmospheric change. At the 30-minute mark, the test officially ended, but she showed no signs of distress whatsoever. When the pod opened, Sarah stepped out and took a deep breath of the Academy's standard atmosphere. "That was interesting," she said. "The air felt a bit thin, kind of like being at high altitude back home. Maybe around 4,000 meters up." Zixthara's mandibles clicked in confusion. "High altitude? You mean your species regularly functions at elevations where the atmospheric pressure is reduced?" "Oh, sure," another human, Marcus Rodriguez, replied as he prepared for his turn. "Lots of us live and work in mountains. Some of our cities are built at altitudes where the oxygen is naturally thinner than what you had in that simulation." Marcus's test results were equally baffling. He lasted the full 30 minutes without difficulty, and emerged asking if there were more challenging atmospheric compositions to try. The third human, Dr. Kim Sato, actually fell asleep during her test, her body so relaxed in the supposedly hostile environment that she entered a natural rest state. By the time all 12 humans had completed the exercise, the other students were staring in open amazement. Every single human had passed with perfect scores, and most had shown less stress than students typically experienced during standard atmospheric tests. "Perhaps," Zixthara said, trying to maintain her professorial composure, "we should move to today's second challenge." The afternoon session took place in the Academy's climate simulation laboratory. Students would be exposed to extreme temperature variations, rapid shifts from just above freezing to uncomfortably warm while completing basic problem-solving tasks. The temperature protocol started at a comfortable galactic standard, then dropped to 2 degrees below freezing, before rapidly climbing to nearly 40 degrees above standard room temperature. Most species found these shifts extremely disorienting and physically demanding. The crystalline student, whose species was particularly sensitive to temperature changes, barely managed to complete the cognitive tests while shivering violently during the cold phase and seeking shade during the heat phase. The aquatic delegate required special life support during the temperature extremes and still struggled to maintain focus. When the humans faced the same challenge, something remarkable happened. As the temperature dropped, they simply pulled additional clothing from their packs, layers they'd brought from their homeworld. When it rose, they removed layers and continued working as if nothing had changed. "The temperature shifts don't bother you at all?" Zixthara asked Commander Chen during a break. "This is actually pretty mild compared to seasonal changes on Earth," Sarah replied. "Yesterday felt like a nice spring day back home. Today's range is probably similar to what we'd experience moving from an air-conditioned building to summer heat, then into a walk-in freezer." "Your planet experiences such extreme variations regularly?" "Daily in some regions," Dr. Sato added. "I grew up in a place where winter temperatures dropped to 40 below freezing, and summer temperatures reached over 40 above standard. This simulation feels like a comfortable autumn day." The other students had gathered around to listen, their expressions ranging from awe to disbelief. The Centaurian delegate, still recovering from the atmospheric test, asked, "How do you function in such conditions?" Marcus laughed. "You adapt. Humans are pretty good at adapting. Our ancestors survived ice ages that covered huge portions of our planet, in frozen water kilometers thick. We've also survived in deserts where the surface temperature can kill unprotected beings in minutes." "But how?" pressed the Saurian student. "What biological advantages do you possess?" The humans exchanged glances, seeming almost embarrassed by the attention. "Honestly, we're not sure we have any special advantages," Sarah admitted. "We just learned to use tools, clothing, and shelter. Most human technology development was driven by trying to survive our planet's environmental challenges." Dr. Manthor, who had been observing from the medical bay, approached the group with his diagnostic equipment. "Would you mind if I ran some biological scans? For scientific purposes." The humans agreed readily, and Dr. Manthor began his examination. What he found defied conventional understanding of evolutionary adaptation. The humans showed no obvious physical modifications for extreme environment survival. Their cellular structure was remarkably similar to other species. Their organs functioned within normal parameters, and their sensory capabilities were average by galactic standards. Yet somehow, they demonstrated survival capabilities that surpassed species who had evolved specific biological adaptations for harsh environments. "It's impossible," Dr. Manthor muttered, reviewing his scans for the third time. "They're surviving through behavioral adaptation and technology use, not biological superiority. But the level of environmental tolerance they're displaying should require millions of years of evolutionary pressure." "How long has your species been dealing with these conditions?" Zixthara asked. "Humans have been adapting to Earth's environments for about 300,000 years, Dr. Sato replied, "though our recorded history only goes back about 10,000 years. The professor calculated quickly. 300,000 years was a relatively short evolutionary timeline for developing such extreme environmental tolerance. Most species required millions of years to develop the biological adaptations needed for surviving on even moderately challenging worlds." As the day's training concluded, Zixthara found herself completely reconsidering her understanding of survival adaptation. The humans hadn't just passed their first day. They'd made it look effortless, while other accomplished students struggled with the basics. Challenges. Tomorrow's training would include zero-gravity maneuvering and emergency shelter construction. Zixthara was beginning to suspect that her carefully designed curriculum might not be challenging enough for these remarkable Deathworld survivors. The real question was, if these were basic survival conditions for humans, what exactly was life like on Earth? Week 2 of Extreme Survival 101 brought the Academy's most feared challenge: zero-gravity emergency protocols. The massive simulation chamber could replicate the conditions of a damaged spacecraft, complete with debris fields, failing life support systems, and complex three-dimensional navigation requirements. Professor Zixthara had seen students from warrior cultures break down crying during this exercise. The combination of disorientation, emergency pressure, and complex problem-solving in weightless conditions pushed most beings to their absolute limits. "Today you will experience catastrophic decompression simulation," she announced to the mixed group of students, floating in the chamber's preparation area. "Your transport has suffered critical damage. You have limited air supply, debris blocking your path to escape pods, and multiple injured crew members to evacuate." The other students gripped their safety tethers nervously. The Gordanian had spent the previous evening practicing breathing exercises to manage panic responses. The crystalline student had requested additional medication for motion sickness. "You will work in mixed teams," Zixthara continued. "Each team must navigate to 3 different sections of the damaged ship, collect emergency supplies, and reach the escape pods within 45 minutes. She activated the simulation, and immediately the chamber transformed into a nightmarish space disaster. Artificial debris tumbled through the air, emergency lights flashed red, and recorded distress calls echoed from hidden speakers. The artificial gravity shut off completely, leaving all students floating in zero gravity. Most non-human students immediately showed signs of disorientation. The saurian began retching within seconds, a common response to sudden weightlessness. The aquatic delegate struggled to understand which direction was up without water currents to guide them. Then the humans moved. Instead of the careful, hesitant movements most species used in zero gravity, the humans pushed off surfaces with confident precision. They spun and oriented themselves in 3 dimensions as if they'd been weightless their entire lives. Sarah Chen caught a piece of simulated debris with one hand, while simultaneously using her other hand to guide a disoriented Centaurian student toward their first objective. "How are they doing that?" Yorp whispered to Professor Zixthara as they monitored from the control room. "I have no idea," she replied, watching Marcus Rodriguez perform what appeared to be an effortless backflip to change direction while carrying emergency equipment. The human team moved through the simulation like they belonged there. They communicated constantly with each other, calling out positions and hazards. When they encountered the injured crew members, sophisticated androids programmed to simulate various emergency medical conditions, the humans immediately began coordinated rescue. Procedures. Dr. Sato took point on medical assessment, quickly triaging the artificial victims while the other humans cleared debris and established safe evacuation routes. They worked with the kind of smooth efficiency that usually took years of training to develop. But what amazed the observers most was how the humans helped their non-human teammates. Instead of abandoning the struggling students, they adapted their rescue techniques to accommodate different species' limitations. When the crystalline student became completely disoriented, two humans formed a protective escort, gently guiding them through the debris field while maintaining constant reassuring communication. Time. Remaining 15 minutes, the simulation announced. Other teams were still struggling with basic navigation. One group had made it to only their first objective. Another had gotten lost in the maze of simulated ship corridors and was backtracking desperately. The human-led team was already at their final checkpoint, methodically loading the last of their injured crew into escape pods. They'd completed the exercise with time to spare, and somehow managed to bring along every struggling student they'd encountered along the way. When the simulation ended, the humans helped other students out of the chamber, many of whom were still shaking from the experience. The Academy's medical staff stood by with anti-nausea medication and stress counseling, but the humans emerged looking energized and excited. "That was fantastic," exclaimed Lieutenant Torres, one of the younger human students. "It reminded me of underwater cave rescue training back home. Same principles, just in 3 dimensions instead of navigating underwater caverns." "Underwater caves?" the Saurian student asked weakly, still recovering from motion sickness. "Sure," Marcus replied casually. "Cave diving is a popular recreational activity in some parts of Earth. You navigate tight underwater spaces with limited air supply, deal with zero visibility, and handle emergency scenarios. Great training for spatial orientation skills." Dr. Manthor approached with his medical scanner, still trying to understand the human's abilities. "Your species practices this type of navigation for entertainment." "Some of us do," Sarah confirmed. "Humans engage in lots of recreational activities that simulate dangerous conditions. Rock climbing, skydiving, deep-sea diving, mountain climbing in extreme weather. We seem to enjoy challenging ourselves. But why?" pressed the Gordanian student, who was finally recovering enough to speak. "Why would any species voluntarily place themselves in life-threatening situations?" The humans exchanged glances, seeming to consider the question seriously. "I guess because our planet made us good at handling dangerous situations," Dr. Sato said finally. "Since we had to develop those skills anyway, we might as well have fun with them." Professor Zixithara called for a break before the afternoon's exercise, emergency shelter construction. While other students rested and recovered, she pulled up the humans' homeworld file again, this time focusing on what their species did for recreation. The list was terrifying. Humans regularly engaged in activities that would be classified as extreme survival scenarios by galactic standards. They deliberately jumped from aircraft with minimal safety equipment. They climbed vertical rock faces without assistance. They raced vehicles at speeds that would be fatal in case of accident. They even engaged in organized combat sports where they attempted to physically overpower each other. "Professor," Yorp said, appearing at her shoulder, "I've been reviewing the exercise recordings. Look at this." He played back footage of the humans moving through zero gravity. Their movements weren't random or instinctive, they were using specific techniques. When Zixthara slowed down the footage, she could see they were applying consistent methods for changing direction, controlling rotation, and maintaining spatial orientation. They've trained for this, she realized. Their species has developed systematic approaches to zero-gravity movement. But according to their files, humans have only had space travel for about a century, Yorp pointed out. How could they have developed such advanced training methods so quickly? Zixithara pulled up Earth's historical records, and what she found was both impressive and slightly disturbing. Humans had indeed been spacefaring for only a short time, but they'd approached space exploration with the same aggressive adaptation strategies they used for everything else. Instead of waiting millions of years to evolve biological adaptations for space travel, humans had immediately begun developing artificial training methods. They built machines that simulated zero gravity, created underwater training facilities that mimicked space conditions, and developed psychological techniques for handling the stress of extraterrestrial environments. The afternoon shelter construction exercise proved equally enlightening. Students were provided with minimal supplies and asked to build emergency shelters capable of protecting them from simulated environmental hazards, acid rain, extreme wind, and temperature fluctuations. Most students approached the challenge methodically, following established procedures they'd learned in theoretical classes. The structures they built were adequate but basic, functional shelters that would provide minimal protection. The humans, however, began building what could only be described as small fortresses. Working together, they created interconnected shelter systems with multiple backup protections, sophisticated ventilation, and even decorative elements. They used techniques that weren't taught in any academy course, creating interlocking supports and weatherproofing systems that seemed to come from practical experience rather than academic learning. "Where did you learn these construction methods?" Zixathara asked, examining their impressively engineered shelters. "Boy Scouts," replied Lieutenant Torres with a grin. "What are Boy Scouts?" "A youth organization on Earth," Sarah explained. "Children learn outdoor survival skills, basic engineering, teamwork, and emergency preparedness. Most human cultures have similar groups where young people practice skills they might need in dangerous situations." "You train your children for survival scenarios?" "Well, yes," Marcus said, as if this were perfectly obvious. "Earth can be unpredictable. We want our kids to be prepared for anything." As evening approached, Professor Zixathara reviewed the day's results with growing amazement and concern. The humans hadn't just completed every exercise successfully, they'd exceeded every performance standard the Academy had established. More troubling, they'd made it all look easy while genuinely enjoying themselves. Tomorrow would bring the course's first major elimination challenge, solo survival on a simulated Class 6 world. The third week of Extreme Survival 101 began with what Professor Zixathara privately called Judgment Day, the solo survival challenge that historically eliminated 40% of students. Each participant would be dropped alone onto a different section of Kepler-7, a harsh Class 6 world with double gravity, acidic atmospheric moisture, and predatory flora that actively hunted anything that moved. The rules were simple: survive for 72 hours with only basic supplies, locate 3 hidden supply caches scattered across hostile terrain, and reach the extraction point. Students were monitored for safety, but rescue would only come if their life signs indicated imminent death. As dawn broke over Kepler-7's crimson landscape, Zixathara watched from the orbiting Academy vessel as transport pods delivered students to their starting positions. Each pod carried emergency beacons, basic rations for 24 hours, a simple water purification device, and minimal shelter materials. The first casualty occurred within 6 hours. The Saurian student, despite weeks of preparation, struggled with the increased gravity and triggered his emergency beacon after falling into an acid moss pit. The second elimination came 12 hours later, when the crystalline delegate suffered atmospheric poisoning from breathing unfiltered air. By the end of day 1, 5 of the 24 non-human students had been evacuated. The survivors were making progress, but their vital signs showed extreme stress. Most were rationing their supplies carefully and moving slowly to conserve energy in the crushing gravity. Then, there were the humans. Dr. Sato had not only located her first supply cache within 4 hours, but had also constructed an elaborate shelter system that seemed to violate several laws of physics. Using techniques no academy instructor had ever seen, she'd created a multi-level structure that filtered acidic moisture, provided protection from the carnivorous plants, and even included a water collection system that purified rainwater more efficiently than her issued equipment. Marcus Rodriguez was having what appeared to be a vacation. His progress tracker showed him moving at nearly twice the pace of other students, and his vital signs indicated he was actually less stressed than during routine academy exercises. Video surveillance revealed he'd somehow figured out how to cook local vegetation, something explicitly warned against in the safety briefings, and was maintaining a diet more nutritious than his issued rations. But it was Sarah Chen who truly shattered the observer's understanding of what was possible. "Professor," Yorp called urgently from his monitoring station. "You need to see this." Zixathara hurried over to Sarah's surveillance feed and stared in disbelief. Instead of struggling to survive, Sarah appeared to be thriving. She'd not only completed the cache location challenge in record time, but had begun what could only be described as improving the local environment. "Is she gardening?" Zixthara asked weakly. "It appears so," Yorp confirmed. "She's identified several native plant species that can neutralize the acidic soil composition. She's also constructed what seems to be a water management system that's creating a small ecosystem around her shelter." The surveillance footage showed Sarah working with calm efficiency, transforming a small section of hostile alien landscape into something resembling a thriving garden. She'd diverted a toxic stream to create a filtering system, planted defensive vegetation that repelled the carnivorous plants, and even attracted several small native creatures that seemed to be helping with pest control. "How is this possible?" Dr. Manthor wondered aloud from the medical bay. "She's not just surviving, she's actively improving conditions on a Class 6 world." Similar reports came in about other human students. Lieutenant Torres had established communication with a herd of local creatures and seemed to be using them for transportation assistance. Dr. Kim had discovered how to process local minerals into building materials and was constructing what appeared to be permanent structures. Most remarkable was the fact that several humans had begun working together despite being dropped in different locations. Using improvised communication systems and natural navigation techniques, they'd managed to coordinate their efforts across kilometers of hostile terrain. "They're not treating this as a survival test," Zixthara realized. "They're treating it as a colonization exercise." By day 2, the contrast between human and non-human performance had become so dramatic that Academy officials began reviewing the test protocols. While non-human students struggled with basic survival requirements, humans were establishing what resembled permanent settlements. The Gordanian student, one of the more successful non-humans, had managed to locate 2 supply caches and was on track to complete the challenge. But his progress tracker showed he was operating at maximum physical capacity, barely maintaining life functions in the hostile environment. Meanwhile, the humans were sending status reports that sounded more like vacation updates than survival reports. "Day 2 progress report," came Marcus's transmission. "Located all supply caches ahead of schedule. Established sustainable food sources. Constructed storm shelter that should handle anything this planet can throw at it. The local fruit tastes terrible but has excellent nutritional content. Weather's been nice, over." "The local fruit?" Zixthara repeated incredulously. "He's eating indigenous vegetation on a Class 6 world." Dr. Manthor checked the medical protocols frantically. "That fruit is classified as potentially toxic to most species. How is he processing it safely?" The answer came from Dr. Sato's detailed biological analysis, transmitted as part of her daily report. Not only had she identified which local plants were safe for human consumption, but she'd figured out how to neutralize toxins in dangerous species and even discovered several with significant medicinal properties. "I've identified 14 plant species that could be valuable for pharmaceutical development," her report noted casually. "Also found a mineral deposit that might be useful for advanced electronics. The local ecosystem is more complex than initial surveys indicated. We'll submit full biological assessment with extraction report." "She's conducting original scientific research," Yorp observed, during a survival test, while treating it as routine fieldwork. Day 3 brought the most dramatic revelation yet. The Academy's monitoring systems detected something impossible. The humans were improving environmental conditions not just around their individual shelters, but across the entire test area. Atmospheric readings showed decreased acidity levels in multiple locations. Soil composition was becoming less toxic. Even the behavior of local predator species was changing, with several carnivorous plant types apparently becoming less aggressive. "It's like they're terraforming the planet," Dr. Manthor whispered in amazement. When extraction time arrived, the contrast between human and non-human students was overwhelming. The surviving non-human students emerged exhausted, dehydrated, and requiring immediate medical attention. They'd completed the challenge, but barely. The humans emerged looking like they'd been on a pleasant camping trip. "That was fun," Lieutenant Torres announced as he boarded the extraction shuttle. "Can we do a longer one next time?" 3 days felt too short to really explore the ecosystem. "You want to spend more time on a Class 6 world?" Zixthara asked in disbelief. "Sure," Sarah replied. "We were just getting started. Give us a week or 2, and we could probably turn that area into a nice little colony site. As the shuttle returned to the academy, Dr. Manthor completed his medical examinations of all students. The non-human survivors showed typical stress responses: elevated cortisol levels, minor dehydration, muscle fatigue, and psychological strain indicators. The humans showed the opposite pattern. Their stress indicators were lower than baseline levels. They'd actually gained weight during the challenge, apparently having found better nutrition on the hostile world than in their regular academy meals. Several showed improved muscle tone from the increased gravity. Most disturbing from a medical perspective, they all seemed disappointed that the test was over. "Professor," Sarah approached Zixthara as they disembarked, "could we submit a proposal for a longer-term survival challenge? My team thinks we could establish a permanent research station on Kepler-7 with maybe 6 months of preparation time." Zixthara stared at her for a long moment. "Commander Chen, that planet is classified as barely habitable by galactic standards. Most species require full environmental suits just to visit safely." "I know," Sarah replied with obvious enthusiasm. "That's what makes it interesting. Earth taught us that the most challenging environments often have the most to offer, if you know how to work with them instead of fighting them." That evening, Professor Zixthara sat in her office reviewing the test results and trying to understand what she'd witnessed. The humans hadn't just passed the survival challenge, they'd essentially colonized a section of hostile alien world in 3 days while treating the experience as recreational activity. Tomorrow would bring the course's midterm examination, a team-based survival challenge on a Class 7 world. Zixthara was beginning to realize that her biggest problem wasn't whether the humans would pass, it was whether the Academy's tests were meaningful when applied to a species that considered extreme survival challenges to be entertainment. She was also starting to wonder what would happen when the humans reached. Week 5 brought the Academy's midterm examination, Team Survival on Arcturus Prime, a Class 7 world that had earned its fearsome reputation through a combination of crushing gravity, extreme weather patterns, and an ecosystem where everything seemed designed to kill visitors. Professor Zixthara had divided the remaining students into mixed teams, deliberately spreading the humans across different groups. She wanted to see how the Deathworlders would function as team members rather than independent operators, and whether their presence would help or hinder their alien teammates. Arcturus Prime was a nightmare world by any reasonable standard. Gravity was nearly triple galactic norm, crushing most species into exhausted submission within hours. The atmosphere contained corrosive elements that ate through standard equipment. Weather patterns included acid storms, hurricane-force winds, and temperature swings that could freeze or boil exposed flesh. The predators were worse. Evolution on Arcturus Prime had produced creatures that made Class 6 world fauna look like harmless pets. Pack hunters with crystalline teeth that could shatter metal, flying predators that hunted by sensing electromagnetic fields given off by technological equipment, and the infamous shadow stalkers, nearly invisible creatures that could phase partially out of normal space to avoid detection. The mission was complex. Each team must traverse 50 kilometers of hostile terrain, establish a functioning base camp, and maintain operations for 1 full week while completing scientific surveys of local conditions. Teams that failed to meet objectives or lost more than 1 member would be eliminated from the program. As the transport ships approached Arcturus Prime's surface, the non-human students were already showing stress responses. The Gordanian had been taking anti-anxiety medication for 2 days. The remaining Centaurian students had spent the voyage in meditation, preparing for what they assumed would be the most challenging experience of their lives. The humans, meanwhile, were clustered around observation windows, pointing excitedly at the planet's violent storm systems and discussing what appeared to be sightseeing plans. "Look at those lightning patterns," Dr. Sato observed to her mixed-species team. "The electrical activity is incredible. I bet we could set up some interesting experiments." Her teammates, a crystalline engineer, an aquatic biologist, and a nervous saurian technician, stared at her in horror. They were looking at lightning storms that could obliterate most known technology, and she was making research plans. Team Alpha, led by Sarah Chen, deployed first. The moment their transport touched down, Arcturus Prime began living up to its deadly reputation. The landing zone was immediately hit by a localized acid storm that ate through their shelter materials within minutes. Gravity that felt like being crushed by an invisible giant made every movement exhausting for the non-human team members. "Okay, everyone stay calm," Sarah announced over the team communication system. "Marcus, Torres, start setting up the acid-resistant shelter protocols. Kim, begin atmospheric analysis for the filter systems. Everyone else, buddy up and stay close to someone with Earth-standard equipment." Within the first hour, something remarkable happened. Instead of the humans carrying their struggling teammates, the mixed teams began functioning with efficiency that exceeded even pure human performance from previous exercises. The key was the humans' teaching approach. Rather than simply taking over difficult tasks, they began rapidly training their alien teammates in Earth-developed survival techniques. Dr. Sato showed her crystalline teammate how to modify standard equipment using improvised materials. Marcus taught the Gordanian student how to move efficiently in high gravity by using techniques developed for underwater operations. "The secret is working with the environment instead of fighting it," Sarah explained to her struggling Saurian teammate as she demonstrated how to use the crushing gravity to assist rather than hinder movement. "On Earth, we learned that you can't overpower nature. You have to understand it and adapt." By day 2, the transformation was dramatic. Teams with human members weren't just surviving, they were thriving. The mixed teams had established base camps that looked more like permanent research stations than temporary shelters. They'd figured out how to predict and avoid the worst weather patterns, established sustainable food and water sources, and even begun documenting new species. More importantly, the alien students were developing capabilities they'd never shown before. Under human guidance, the crystalline engineer designed shelter modifications that exceeded Academy standards. The aquatic biologist discovered applications for Earth-style survival techniques that worked brilliantly in Arcturus Prime's hostile environment. It's like they're unlocking potential in other species, Dr. Manthor observed from the orbital monitoring station. The non-human students are performing far beyond their previously demonstrated capabilities. Team Beta, with Lieutenant Torres as the human member, had made an even more remarkable discovery. Instead of simply avoiding the shadow stalkers, they'd figured out how to communicate with them. "These aren't just predators," Torres reported during his daily transmission. "They're actually pretty intelligent. Once you understand their hunting patterns, you can establish a kind of mutual respect. They're curious about us, and they seem to appreciate that we're not trying to damage their territory." The surveillance footage showed Torres sitting calmly next to a creature that had terrorized previous Academy expeditions, apparently engaged in some form of interspecies communication. His alien teammates, initially terrified, were now working alongside the shadow stalkers in what appeared to be cooperative scientific research. "How is this possible?" Professor Zixathera asked her monitoring team. "Shadow stalkers have never shown non-aggressive behavior toward alien visitors." According to Torres's reports, the key was approach methodology, Yorp replied, reviewing the data. Instead of treating them as threats to be avoided or eliminated, his team approached them as potential intelligent contacts. Earth's diplomatic protocols apparently include procedures for first contact with unknown species. They have first contact protocols for survival training. Apparently, humans consider the possibility of encountering unknown intelligent life to be a standard element of extreme environment exploration. By day 3, all human-led teams had not only completed their primary objectives, but had begun additional projects that went far beyond the Academy's requirements. They were conducting geological surveys, biological research, atmospheric studies, and even what appeared to be preliminary terraforming experiments. Team Gamma, led by Dr. Kim, had discovered something that made Professor Zixathera question fundamental assumptions about planetary classification. Using Earth-developed techniques for soil analysis and ecosystem management, they'd identified ways to neutralize many of Arcturus Prime's most hostile environmental factors. The corrosive atmospheric elements can actually be processed by modified versions of local plant life, Dr. Kim reported. With some basic biological engineering, we could probably reduce the atmospheric toxicity by 60% within a few years. The gravity is challenging, but we've identified mineral deposits that could be used to create localized gravity management systems. They're proposing to terraform a Class 7 world, Dr. Manthor said weakly, as a homework assignment. But the most significant development was what happened to the teams without human members. For the first time in Academy history, mixed teams with human guidance were outperforming pure alien teams so dramatically that it challenged basic assumptions about species capabilities. The pure Centaurian team, despite being from a relatively challenging homeworld, was struggling with basic survival requirements. The All-Gordanian team had completed their objectives but required constant emergency support. Meanwhile, teams with single human members were treating the exercise as an opportunity for advanced research and development. "Professor," Yorp approached her with the latest performance data. "I've been analyzing the comparative results. Teams with human members aren't just performing better, they're operating at skill levels that exceed our advanced graduate programs." Week 6 continued the pattern. By the end of the Arcturus Prime exercise, every human-led team had completed not just their assigned objectives, but had submitted additional research that would have been worthy of doctoral dissertations. They'd mapped new species, identified exploitable resources, established sustainable habitat systems, and even created preliminary plans for permanent colony establishment. When the extraction ships arrived, the contrast was overwhelming. Pure alien teams emerged exhausted and traumatized, requiring extensive medical care and psychological support. Human-led teams emerged energized and excited, already making plans for return expeditions. "That was incredible," Dr. Sato announced as her team boarded the extraction shuttle. "We barely scratched the surface of what's possible there. With maybe 6 months and proper equipment, we could turn Arcturus Prime into a garden world." "A garden world?" Zixthara repeated faintly. "It's a Class 7 death planet." "Only because nobody's applied the right techniques yet," Sarah replied. "Earth taught us that there's no such thing as a permanently hostile world, just worlds that haven't been properly understood yet." As the Academy ships departed Arcturus Prime, Professor Zixthara found herself facing an unprecedented situation. The midterm examination had been designed to eliminate weak students and challenge even the strongest survivors. Instead, the humans had turned it into a demonstration that most supposedly hostile worlds were actually underdeveloped real estate opportunities. Tomorrow would begin preparation for the final examination on Rigel 7th, the Academy's ultimate test, which had a 37% failure rate among the galaxy's elite survival specialists. Zixthara was no longer worried about whether the final 2 weeks before the ultimate examination were unlike anything in the Academy's history. Professor Zixthara had originally planned to use this time for intensive preparation and final skill assessment, but the humans had transformed it into something resembling a graduate research symposium. Word of the extraordinary midterm results had spread throughout the galactic academic community. Xenobiologists, planetary engineers, and survival specialists from across known space were requesting access to the human students' research data. The preliminary terraforming proposals for Arcturus Prime had caused such excitement that 3 different governments had inquired about colonization rights. "Professor," Yorp announced during their morning briefing, "we have 17 research institutions requesting permission to interview the human students. The Galactic Council of Sciences wants to classify their survival techniques as advanced strategic technologies." Zixthara rubbed her mandibles tiredly. "What did the humans say when you told them about the research requests?" They seemed confused about the attention. Commander Chen said they were just applying basic Earth techniques and didn't understand why everyone was so excited. She offered to teach free workshops on elementary survival skills for any interested faculty. "Elementary survival skills," Zixthara repeated. "They consider terraforming a Class 7 world to be elementary." The humans had spent the preparation period treating the Academy like their personal research laboratory. Dr. Sato had established a biological research program that was making discoveries faster than the Academy's professional researchers. Marcus Rodriguez had designed equipment modifications that exceeded galactic industry standards. Lieutenant Torres had written what appeared to be the first comprehensive guide to interspecies diplomatic protocols for hostile environment exploration, but it was Sarah, Chen's latest project, that had caused the most excitement and terror among Academy staff. She'd submitted a formal proposal to attempt what she called live ecosystem integration during the final examination. "She wants to do what?" Dr. Manthor asked when Zixthara showed him the proposal. "Establish permanent human presence on Rigel 7 while demonstrating sustainable integration with local ecosystem dynamics," Zixthara read from the document. She's treating the final exam as an opportunity to prove that humans can successfully colonize Class 8 worlds, Rigel. SEVT was the Academy's ultimate test because it represented the absolute limit of survivable conditions. Gravity nearly 4 times galactic standard. Atmospheric composition that was toxic to most known life forms. Weather patterns that included plasma storms capable of melting metal. And an ecosystem dominated by creatures that made Arcturus. Prime's predators look friendly. The world's most distinctive feature was its living mountains. Geological formations that were actually massive silicon-based organisms that could reshape terrain at will. Previous expeditions had lost entire teams to sudden landscape changes that opened chasms or created impassable barriers without warning. Most terrifying were the apex predators, pack hunters called Void Rippers, that could manipulate localized spacetime to appear and disappear at will. They were intelligent, ruthless, and had never shown any interest in anything except killing and consuming any alien life that entered their territory. The Academy's final examination protocol was simple. Survive alone on Rigel 7 for 1 full week, document local conditions, and reach the extraction point. Students who attempted the test did so with the understanding that rescue might not be possible if things went wrong. The humans want to attempt group colonization instead of individual survival, Zixthara explained to the Academy's board of directors during an emergency meeting. They're requesting permission to bring additional equipment and establish what they call a proof-of-concept settlement. Director Kothara, a distinguished elderly Centaurian, leaned forward with obvious concern. Professor Zixthara, I must ask, are these humans actually qualified for this examination, or have we made a serious error in judgment? Sir, they're not just qualified. They're operating at levels that exceed our most advanced theoretical models. The question isn't whether they can pass the examination. The question is whether we should allow them to attempt something that might fundamentally change how we understand planetary habitability. The board spent 3 days debating the unprecedented situation. Never before had students requested permission to modify the final examination. Never before had survival students submitted research proposals that belonged in advanced graduate programs. And never before had anyone suggested that a Class 8 world might be suitable for colonization. The decision came down to scientific curiosity overriding institutional caution. The Academy voted to allow the humans to attempt their enhanced examination protocol under extensive monitoring, with additional safety measures and emergency response teams standing by. When Professor Zixthara informed the humans of the board's decision, their response was enthusiastic planning rather than nervous preparation. Excellent, Sarah announced. We'll need to modify our equipment loadout and adjust our timeline estimates. Rigel 7's gravitational differential will require some interesting adaptations, but the plasma storms actually offer some advantages for power generation if we position our base camp correctly. You're planning to use plasma storms for power generation? Zixthara asked weakly. Sure, Marcus replied. Lightning harvesting is a standard technique in some Earth regions. Plasma storms are just lightning with better energy density. We'll need to build more robust collection systems, but the principles are the same. Dr. Sato was already deep in research mode, studying Rigel 7's biological surveys. The silicon-based organisms are fascinating, she noted. I think we can establish communication protocols. Their behavior patterns suggest intelligence, and if they're territorial rather than hostile, we might be able to negotiate usage agreements. Usage agreements, Dr. Manthor repeated. With living mountains, why not? Lieutenant Torres asked. Humans have a long history of coexistence with large, potentially dangerous organisms. Whales, elephants, bears, lots of species that could easily kill humans but usually don't if you respect their space and understand their needs. The final week of preparation resembled a military operation crossed with a research expedition. The humans worked with Academy engineers to modify standard survival equipment for extreme environment use. They developed new communication protocols, designed innovative shelter systems, and created contingency plans for scenarios that had never been attempted before. Most remarkably, they approached the challenge with the same calm enthusiasm they'd shown throughout the entire course. While Academy staff worried about safety protocols and emergency procedures, the humans were excited about the learning opportunity. This is going to be amazing, Dr. Kim said during the final equipment check. A completely unique ecosystem, gravitational conditions we've never experienced, weather patterns that don't exist anywhere else in known space. It's like getting to explore an alien world that no one's ever really studied before. People have studied Rigel 7, Zixthara pointed out, extensively. That's why it's classified as barely survivable. They've studied it from a how do we avoid dying perspective, Sarah corrected. We're going to study it from a how do we make this work perspective. Completely different approach. As the transport ships prepared for departure to Rigel 7, Professor Zixthara found herself caught between admiration and terror. The humans had already exceeded every expectation and broken every assumption about survival capabilities. They'd turned routine training exercises into advanced research projects and transformed hostile worlds into potential colony sites. But Rigel 7 represented something different. It wasn't just a hostile environment. It was a world that actively fought back against alien presence. The living mountains could bury intruders without warning. The Void Rippers had never shown mercy to any previous expedition. The plasma storms had destroyed ships in orbit. If the humans succeeded in their colonization attempt, it would revolutionize galactic understanding of planetary habitability and species adaptation. If they failed, the Academy would lose the most remarkable students in its history to the galaxy's most dangerous world. As the ships entered hyperspace for the journey to Rigel 7, Zixthara realized she was about to witness either the greatest triumph or the most spectacular failure in the Academy's 200-year history. Either way, it would certainly be the most interesting final examination ever attempted. Or the humans would pass. She was beginning to wonder if Rigel 7 would survive the experience. Rigel 7 hung in space like a malevolent jewel, its surface crackling with plasma storms that could be seen from orbit. The Academy monitoring ships maintained careful distance as the human transport approached the planet's chaotic atmosphere. Professor Zixthara watched from the command deck, her mandibles clicking nervously as she observed readings that would have terrified experienced pilots. "Atmospheric entry in 30 minutes, announced Captain Veltar, whose 4 arms were busy managing multiple control systems simultaneously. "I must advise again that this approach violates 17 different safety protocols." "The humans requested this insertion method," Zixthara replied, though she shared the captain's concerns. Instead of the safe, slow approach used for previous examinations, the humans had asked to be dropped directly into the middle of an active plasma storm system. "They want to test their lightning collection systems immediately," Sarah had explained during the briefing. "Plus, the electrical activity will mask our arrival from any local predators that hunt by electromagnetic signature." The transport shuddered as it hit Rigel 7's atmosphere. Plasma discharge illuminated the viewports in brilliant flashes of purple and white. The ship's sensors screamed warnings about electromagnetic interference, radiation levels, and atmospheric toxicity that exceeded safe exposure limits. Through it all, the 12 human students remained calm, checking their equipment and discussing technical details as if they were preparing for a routine training exercise. "Storm intensity is perfect," Dr. Sato observed, watching the energy readings spike across her instruments. "This electrical activity is going to provide more power than we initially calculated. Local gravity is significant," Marcus noted as the ship's artificial gravity systems struggled to compensate for Rigel 7's crushing pull, "but manageable. It's like deep-sea diving but vertically instead of underwater pressure." The landing was controlled chaos. The transport touched down in what the humans had identified as a relatively stable area between 2 active plasma storms, on a plateau that happened to be the back of a dormant, living mountain. The moment the landing ramp lowered, Rigel 7's full hostility became apparent. The air itself seemed alive with energy. Every breath burned with metallic taste. The crushing gravity made movement exhausting for the Academy observers monitoring from the ship. The ground beneath their feet occasionally shifted as the living mountain adjusted its position. The humans stepped onto the surface and immediately went to work. Instead of the careful, defensive approach used by previous expeditions, they began what could only be described as aggressive construction. Within the first hour, they'd established a base camp that looked more like an engineering project than a survival shelter. "Lightning rod network is operational," Lieutenant Torres reported over the communication system. "We're already collecting more power than we can use. Dr. Kim, how's the atmospheric processing coming?" "Filtration systems are working perfectly," came the reply. Air quality inside the perimeter is approaching Earth normal. The local atmospheric toxins are actually pretty easy to neutralize once you understand the chemistry. Professor Zixthara watched in amazement as the humans transformed their landing zone from barely survivable to actively comfortable. They worked with the kind of efficient coordination that suggested they'd practiced these exact procedures, though no one had ever attempted permanent settlement on a Class 8 world before. Professor, Dr. Manthor called from his monitoring station. Their vital signs are unusual. Stress indicators? That's just it. They're showing no stress response at all. If anything, their biological readings suggest they're enjoying themselves. The first major test came on day 2, when the humans encountered Rigel 7's legendary Void Rippers. The Academy had lost 3 research teams to these creatures over the years. They were intelligent pack hunters that could manipulate space-time to appear without warning, making them essentially impossible to defend against. The standard protocol was to avoid areas where Void Rippers had been detected. The humans, however, had different plans. Contact established with local apex predators, Sarah reported calmly. Initiating communication protocols. Communication protocols? Zixthara repeated in alarm. Those are Void Rippers. They don't communicate, they kill. The surveillance footage showed something impossible. Instead of attacking, the Void Rippers were observing. 3 of the creatures had materialized around the human base camp and were watching the construction activities with obvious intelligence. They're curious about our building techniques, Dr. Sato explained during her daily report. These aren't mindless predators, they're sophisticated hunters who've never encountered anything that tried to improve their territory. Instead of just passing through, you're improving their territory? Well, yes. The atmospheric filtration and soil stabilization we're doing benefits the entire local ecosystem. The Void Rippers seem to appreciate the upgrades. By day 3, the impossible was becoming routine. The humans had established not just a survival base, but a thriving research station. They'd made contact with the living mountains and negotiated what appeared to be a territorial agreement. The Void Rippers had become something resembling security consultants, helping to identify and deal with other dangerous creatures in the area. Most remarkably, they were documenting discovery after discovery that revolutionized understanding of Class 8 world ecosystems. The living mountains aren't just organisms, Dr. Kim reported. They're actually collective intelligence systems, biological computers that process geological data across continental scales. They've been trying to optimize planetary conditions for millions of years. The Void Rippers aren't just predators either, Lieutenant Torres added. They're actually maintenance engineers for the mountain systems. They eliminate invasive species and manage population balances to maintain ecosystem stability. You're saying Rigel 7 has a planetary management system? Zixthara asked, trying to process this information. More sophisticated than anything we've seen in the galaxy, Sarah confirmed. The plasma storms aren't random weather. They're part of an atmospheric regulation system. The toxic elements aren't waste products. They're chemical signals in a planet-wide communication network. By day 4, the Academy monitoring teams were recording developments that belonged in xenobiology textbooks, rather than survival training reports. The humans hadn't just survived on Rigel 7th. They'd integrated themselves into the planet's existing management systems. We've been invited to participate in a geological adjustment project, Marcus reported with obvious excitement. The local mountain collective wants to optimize mineral distribution in this region, and they're interested in our soil chemistry modifications. Participate in geological adjustment, Dr. Manthor repeated weakly. They're helping to reshape a planet. The final 3 days of the examination became a demonstration of something unprecedented in galactic history. Successful integration of alien species with a Class 8 world's natural systems. The humans worked alongside Void Rippers to manage local ecosystem balance, collaborated with living mountains to optimize geological stability, and used plasma storms to power research that was advancing multiple scientific fields simultaneously. When extraction time arrived, the Academy teams faced an unprecedented situation. The final examination was supposed to end with exhausted, traumatized survivors being rescued from a hostile world. Instead, they found a thriving research colony that the humans were reluctant to abandon. Do we have to leave? Dr. Sato asked as the extraction ships prepared for departure. We're just getting started here, Give us another few weeks and we could have the foundation for a permanent settlement. A permanent settlement, Professor Zixithera said faintly. On Rigel 7, why not? Sarah replied. The local management systems are fascinating, the research opportunities are incredible, and we've established good working relationships with the indigenous intelligence networks. This could be humanity's first Class 8 colony. As the Academy's ships departed Rigel 7, Professor Zixithara found herself completing paperwork for something that had never happened before. Students who had not only passed the Academy's ultimate survival examination, but had essentially colonized the test site. The humans' final reports would require an entirely new classification system. They demonstrated survival capabilities that exceeded theoretical maximums, established diplomatic relations with previously unknown intelligent species, and proven that worlds considered barely survivable could actually support thriving civilizations. 6 months later, the Galactic Academy of Advanced Survival Studies faced a problem they'd never anticipated: too many applications. Word of the human achievement had spread throughout known space, and species from across the galaxy wanted to learn Earth-style survival techniques. The Academy had to establish an entirely new advanced program: Deathworld Integration Studies, taught by human instructors who treated the galaxy's most hostile environments as development opportunities rather than survival challenges. Professor Zixithara, now director of the new program, often reflected on the original question that had started it all: whether creatures from a Class 2 death world could handle standard survival training. The answer, as it turned out, way too,